You know, Tom Jones has quite the backstory about his coney sauce, if you ask him about it. It has something to do with South Dakota. I got a little lost halfway through, but anyhow. Thanks for coming out. I guess it's not bad being in here considering what the weather's like outside. And it's a weekday, so I know you've all... No, this is a senior center. You don't have to leave your job and take the day off. We get to do this all the time. I'm going to try something I've never done before. I've never actually just done a reading where I read my stories. It's kind of the David Sedaris sort of thing. So I don't know. It could turn out to be much. It could be interesting or it could be really boring. We'll just have to see. So thanks for sticking with me. I guess I want to start by explaining, and also I don't have a microphone. I hope you guys can hear me. I want to start by explaining how I got into this writing thing in the first place. Since I moved back to Stoughton in 2010, I've been doing slide lectures around town, usually humorous things based on Norwegian experience and stuff like that, the Sons of Norway, other places. And about 6 years ago, Darlene Arneson got a hold of me and said, the Hub's looking for some folks to do their community voices columns. And she thought it might be a good fit for me. And I was kind of interested. I've never been trained as a writer. I've never taken a class or anything like that. When I write, I try to make it sound like stuff I'd read before. But I've always written things. In the 80s, I wrote humorous pieces for some underground zines. Zines were a big thing in the 80s, you know, along with, they kept Kinko's going. People would produce their own. I wrote for one called Espresso Tilt in Philadelphia that a friend ran. I was the Western States correspondent. And I also was a freelance concert reviewer for the Fort Collins Coloradoan, which is a Gannett paper. In the 80s, I would go see a concert and then write a review. I didn't have a car, so I'd have to ride my bike out to the offices and file the story before midnight, which was kind of tricky, but it was worth it because I got $15 a story. And once I wrote a story that went national. Gannett owned USA Today, so it was in USA Today as well, and for that, I got $25. Yeah. Also, I was in the early 90s, I was a drive-time DJ for the radio station KTCL, and I did that for 5 years, and I wrote humorous things almost every day, but each day I did a segment called Music News. I did 3 minutes of kind of music gossip, and even though I wrote them, I could write them for the way I spoke, so I didn't have to be grammatically correct. But I would read them at 9 every morning, and then I would record them, and they'd play at 3 in the afternoon. And over the course of my 5 years there, I did about 1,500 of them. So that's kind of like writing. And then later on, I wrote book reviews for the Rocky Mountain News, which is now defunct, in Denver as well. But the Hub editors didn't care about that at all. They basically just wanted some different local perspectives on things. And so I wrote a couple stories for them, and they thought they were okay, and that was that. It was 5 years ago, it seems longer, and I know I said I wrote about 40, but it turns out I counted them, and I'd only written 27 so far. So for a compilation, I guess I should do at least 50, so it'll be a while before that. Back when I started, a guy named Jim Ferroli was the editor, and it was like having a high school teacher. You'd submit your story, and he would criticize it, and he would write back, and then he would edit it and move things around, and you'd sit there just terrified that he was going to reject it or give you a C or something like that. And that was nerve-wracking. Luckily, he went somewhere else, and the new editor is a guy named Scott De La Rue, and Scott is a really busy guy, because besides the Hub, there's the paper in Verona and Oregon, and I don't know, there might even be a Fitchburg one, but anyhow, he's way too busy to edit anything, so he just prints my stuff, which is really great and a lot less nerve-wracking. And Anita and I've got this routine now, my wife Anita over here, she's my editor, and she corrects everything and stuff, so by the time we send them in, they're pretty much done, and they don't dig with them too much. Of course, it's the Hub, so even if they did, you know. And by the way, I've never met either of those gentlemen. I've really never met anybody from the Hub. I've never talked with them on the phone. That seems a little weird to me, but then I'm old. So we do communicate by email. They've always been friendly, but I know what they look like because we all have little pictures like that. So I think they have bodies, but I only know them by their heads. And also, as you probably know, the pay is a nice round number, that number being 0. And amazingly enough, I still have to pay for my own subscription as well. And sometimes they don't get delivered and we call up. But anyhow, on the plus side, we have a local newspaper. And who knows, every time I do something like that, I think, how much longer will this last? So I think at this point in time, just to be thankful for a paper. Also, like I said, they, when you make mistakes, people aren't very judgmental. In fact, so far, everybody's been really kind to me. Once in a while, there'll be a little correction, but in general, people are really kind about it, and I get a lot of good response. So I find it very interesting. So, very meaningful. Anyhow, so I'm going to read a few stories today, and in between we can chat about them and go off on some tangents, and I'll just read as many as I have time for. The first story I wrote was about the Fendermen, the rock and roll band that actually were in Stoughton during the time of their greatest hit, their version of Mule Skinner Blues. And if you want to hear that story, you can go to Wisconsin Life at Wisconsin Public Radio, because we actually recorded that for that series that they play. And they play it every once in a while. In fact, the Friday before Soot and Mai, apparently they played it. So you can just Google that, Wisconsin Life, and hear the story about the Fendermen with sound effects and stuff like that. I worked with a fellow who lives here in town that produces those, so it sounded all fancy and stuff. But the first one I want to read is called Death of a Friend Recalls Simpler Times in Our Lives. I'll talk a little bit about the headlines. Sometimes I come up with them, sometimes they do. But anyhow, this is about the death of my friend Eddie Rowe. My childhood friend Eddie died last February. He had one of the best memorial services ever. His beloved snowmobile was on a pedestal at the entrance of the funeral home. Speakers fondly recalled Eddie and his passions, including friends, family, motorcycles, and snowmobiles, while wearing Eddie's favorite feed caps. Lovely country hymns were sung, and each attendee was left with a refrigerator magnet with a photo of Eddie on his snowmobile, emblazoned with the words, "Go, Eddie, go." Led Zeppelin might have proclaimed there was a stairway to heaven, but in Stoughton, the roads to the pearly gates was best negotiated on an Arctic cat. It all brought back memories of a simpler time. Eddie was part of a tight-knit group of boys who lived in the Pleasant Hill region of Stoughton, an area bordered roughly by Van Buren Street to the east, Main Street to the north, and Pleasant View Drive to the west. Beyond that, there was nothing but farmland with nary a splash pad or covenant-controlled home to block our paths to rural bliss. There were 7 of us, and we passed our days in unrestricted happiness, playing out whatever games our imagination would allow. This was the 60s, when parents were parents and kids were kids, and we knew enough to keep our distance from each other. There was no such thing as a play date, and we were free to roam all day long, especially during the summer months. The only exception was a break for lunch, which the bellow of the noon whistle signaled daily in no uncertain terms. Remember that? Other than that, the days were ours. Directly behind my house was Clonglin's chicken farm, with plenty of cribs and sheds to climb and make mischief in. We staged medieval duels with swords fashioned from tobacco laths and made mazes out of loose chicken crates. Farther south lay the pits, 3 wooden debts in the landscape, vestiges from the Driftless era. There we would reenact scenes from treasured movies, usually The Magnificent Seven or The Great Escape, both which starred Steve McQueen, our favorite actor. We played terribly incorrect games like Total War, whose only rule involved a ban on throwing rocks. Dirt clods to the body and head? Okay. We also managed to build a rudimentary 3-story treehouse and would pour a full molten mix of water and chicken feed onto unsuspecting invaders below. Outings would bring us to the under construction Thompson Edition, where we could crawl into culverts for hundreds of yards, and long trips included riding our Stingray bikes to Cooksville with tridents to attempt to spear creatures in Badfish Creek, aka carp. What were our parents thinking? Apparently not a lot. My father also taught us how to make catapults, using the springs from the now shuttered Chosa's trampoline court. And soon we were showering unsuspecting vehicles with a veritable cornucopia of rotten fruit from camouflaged locations. And, that's true. And our homemade carts. Pilfered wheels from legitimate soapbox derby cars turned into two-man demolition devices. Sure, they were injuries, but nothing a little mercurochrome or ace bandages couldn't fix. This is how our group passed our days, from 4th through 8th grade. We felt bad that the neighborhood girls didn't get to have the same level of fun that we did, but they were few and far between and weren't organized in the same fashion. Turns out they would get their revenge later with the onset of puberty. To say it was a simpler time is obviously an old cliche, but it was really true. Cultural choices were limited. We all saw the same movies and TV shows. Our imaginations filled in any gaps, and kids were everywhere. This was the height of the baby boom years, and there was a lot of us outside looking for things to do. Eddie never tired of telling stories about the old days, and his recall was beyond impeccable when it came to details. He always said that sharing memories of our childhood was the one of the things he cherished most in life. Now as we near 70, there are only 3 left of the original Pleasant Hill gang. There are times when we question whether there's veracity to our nostalgia. Could we really have enjoyed ourselves that much? Perhaps I'm naive, but I think the answer is yes. And I know Eddie would wholeheartedly agree. Here's hoping there's an amazing tobacco shed in the great beyond and a snowmobile trail that leads Eddie directly to it. Okay, that was my first story. A lot of my stories obviously are nostalgic in nature, and who knows how much that's got washed over and where the truth is. The last time I saw Eddie, and he died on February 22nd, 2019, so this one was written before the pandemic, probably sometime in the spring of 2019. But the last time I saw Eddie, I'd just done a little slide lecture at the Stoughton Public Library. And Eddie came, and a bunch of my high school classmates came. And afterwards, we went over to Fahrenheit to have drinks and talk. And when I left, Eddie was sitting at the bar surrounded by a bunch of classmates telling stories about our youth and about growing up. So it was really, really pretty sweet. You guys remember when the Thompson edition was being built? That's a long time ago, but they had culverts, and we would crawl into these. It's just, that's a cliche they always say, it's amazing we survived our childhoods because there was no safety rules at all. And our friend Dan Judd, who was part of the group, suffered most of the injuries. In fact, usually twice a year he would break a bone. And when we built the carts and stuff, that really got upped a lot. More stitches and a lot of broken bones, but God bless him, Dan Judd tended to field most of the injuries. Okay, so I could just go on to another one if you don't mind. Can you hear me okay, or more than you'd probably like? So some of my things are nostalgic, but others are kind of historical in nature. What I like to do is write about some Stoughton history, but connect it to myself and then others as well. In fact, if I can mention a bunch of Stoughton people in the stories, that's always good, because everybody likes to see their name in print. So the next one has to do with Peteville, which of course is right over here behind La Cerisa. And I got to really thank Eloise at the library. The library in general, they have these beautiful files full of Stoughton stuff. And if you've got some free time, just go and fish through them. There's all kinds of astonishing stories, and Eloise is the keeper of the files. And so when I mentioned to her I was interested in Peteville, she started keeping a file for me. So I'd come in and she'd say, oh, I found these things for you, That's pretty great. I think there's like research departments for seriously big newspapers, but in this case, we just had Eloise. So anyhow, that was tricky and really good. I mean, not tricky, but anyhow, Peteville, it's something I was curious about because everybody knows about Peteville, but what about the details? So I wrote this story, and this is at the beginning of the pandemic. You notice, like in that last story, I was nearing my 70s, now I'm well into them. Anyhow, this one's I called it Uncovering the Mysteries of Peteville, but they titled it Mysteries of Peteville Include Rascals and a Bent Bridge. Let me take a drink of water. I've seen professionals do that. They drink water in between. At one time or another, most residents of Stoughton, even newcomers, hear about the existence of Peteville, a mysterious, semi-mythical community within a community that has existed down by the river for what seems like an eternity. Everyone agrees that Peteville is a real thing, but its essence and specifics are much more difficult to categorize. As a child, Peteville was our shortcut to downtown. We would ride our bikes up and down the Peteville Hill off of Jefferson Street, or more correctly, ride our bikes down, push our bikes back up. We passed through Peteville as fast as possible because it was shadowy and otherworldly, like some Depression-era Hooverville just plopped down in the middle of our town. It was easy to create scary Peteville scenarios involving long-dead inhabitants or evil Nissa lurking under the footbridge. We avoided it on Halloween at all costs. Peteville had its less scary beginnings around 1900, when an industrious developer named Pete Hagen began building reasonably priced framed homes crowded together on the west bank of the Yahara River, just south of Main Street. Dubbed Peteville in honor of landlord Hagen, most of the houses were occupied by working-class Norwegian immigrants employed at the thriving Stoughton Wagon Works, formerly the Mant Wagon Works, just across the river. So that would be where Uniroyal is right now. As early as 1903, this publication being the Hub, reported the workers are agitating for their building of a footbridge across the river. And in 1907, the residents got their wish when the wagon company built the first wooden footbridge connecting Peteville directly to the factory across the river. The total cost of the bridge was $430, $330 which was allocated by the city, and $100 which came from private donations. Thus began the golden age of Peteville. At its height, the flourishing community had its own grocery store and riverfront park where large crowds of townspeople reportedly gathered on sunny Sunday afternoons for picnics, fishing, and sunbathing. In 1925, an iron and concrete bridge was constructed to permanently replace the rather unstable original, making access to the unusual borough even more convenient. This time it cost $4,300. But over time, Peteville's luster began to fade. Fire regulators started noticing that the houses were too close together. Many of the tiny homes became too dilapidated and dangerous to repair and were subsequently torn down. Eventually, the grocery store closed up, the park disappeared. As new post-war housing mushroomed around town, Peteville slowly became a historic artifact, a mere footnote to the city's history. And yet, the allure of Peteville continues. There's a photo of the Peteville gang that's been circulating for years. It features 14 boys and 2 dogs and appears to be from the early 30s. The boys have a street urchin appeal to them and look like they're auditioning for the Little Rascals of our gang film fame. Bruce Anderson, whose father appears in the picture, says that isn't really far from the truth and that every boy in the picture thought they were destined for Hollywood stardom. Tall tales have always been a feature of Peteville lore. One longtime resident who recalls visiting the neighborhood on grade school field trips told me the story of an old-timer who would purportedly flood his basement every fall and stock it with Yahara River bluegills to assure that his family would have enough to eat over the sparse Depression winter months. Wow. The footbridge itself has always been a bone of contention. In 1977, city officials began floating the idea of replacing the footbridge with a 2-lane automobile traffic bridge, which would have effectively destroyed the Peteville neighborhood. Who knew? A group called Save the Footbridge, spearheaded by local activist and longtime Peteville resident Gary Nelson Murphy, also a legendary pain in the ass, was formed to fight this suggestion, and in 1978, they prevailed. And then there's the story of the drunken truck driver. Sometime in the winter, a little over a decade ago, a fellow was drinking to excess in a local establishment, obviously Water's Edge, when he accepted a challenge to drive his trailerless semi-cab across the footbridge, which measured 8 feet across in width. Amazingly enough, he was able to make it across the entire bridge without it collapsing, although the guardrails on both sides were subsequently bent at 45-degree angles. Local residents recall the besotted driver's victory celebration being cut short when he was arrested on the spot. More recently, the borough survived being isolated from the outside world during the construction of the Norwegian Heritage Center, Main Page Court, right over there, the only vehicular access to Peteville, was cut off by construction vehicles for the better part of a year, making entry and exit nearly impossible. In a move replete with cruel irony, the center celebrating the Norwegian immigrant experience never bothered to inform or compensate the inhabitants of this seminal immigrant neighborhood about the discomfort they caused. See, that's hard-hitting journalism. I dare to say it. And now there's a sign on the footbridge that reads, "Due to unsafe conditions, the bridge will be closed until further notice." Damn, maybe that truck did some damage after all. Again, that was a while back. And yet Peteville prevails, in reality and in our collective memory and imagination. When or if in-person socializing returns, try bringing up the topic of Peteville when talking to others about our fine community. Chances are the ensuing conversation will be informative, memorable, and possibly surprising. Now, in retrospect, why didn't I say, since we're all having to be alone in our homes, talk about Peteville on a Zoom call or something? I guess this was early on before we thought about communicating, and that's why I said that. Anybody remember Gary Nelson Murphy? Before I left here in the 70s, he was a real accomplished artist. But over the years, I know he became kind of a famous local crackpot that was always dinking with the government, always trying to find out ways to bilk the system. But he was the original real spokesperson for Peteville. So in this case, I had some stuff in files, and then I had a friend who lived in Peteville for years, and I asked her and I don't know if her and her husband or boyfriend, if they had any Peteville stories, and he sent me a whole page of things about Peteville. Anybody remember when they drained the river? I wasn't here during that time. I mean, that's what's so weird about me writing these things. I was gone for a while, so my memories tend to be in the past, but there was a lot of stories about things when the river got drained. People, especially in Peteville, would go out and find all kinds of stuff, There was horse carcasses, and they would find horseshoes and things, and there's all kinds of tales from that part. Also, it turns out, it was more than a decade ago that the fellow drove across the footbridge, but anybody know anybody that saw it? I talked to some people, and again, I try to explain to my wife that I have to spend time in local bars because I'm doing research and need to pick up on the zeitgeist of the community, and that the alcohol certainly wouldn't be an issue. But yeah, I've heard from a variety of folks that actually saw the aftermath. So again, like I said, some of these things, well, like all kind of folklore or history, some of it's real historical and factual, and other times maybe not, but that's the way that kind of stuff works. So anyhow, well, shucks, I'll keep reading, and anytime if anybody wants to interject something, that's okay. Well, we might as well go on to Stoughton Again, most of these are early ones that I wrote. This one is from, not surprisingly, May 14th, 2020, so right around Stoughton. And, well, I guess the story explains it. Again, it was during the pandemic, and it's funny. I think a lot of us are of an age where we remember Stoughton in the 70s, and it was a lot different. But I noticed folks didn't, you do it among friends, but you didn't talk about it in general because it was kind of a debauched period, and a lot of really wild stuff went on. But hey, we're old now. We got to talk about those days. Young people don't know how much, well, fun or tragedy we experienced and that kind of stuff. And I noticed as I go around town, I just bring it up to folks, everybody had some sort of memory and stuff. So I was kind of surprised. At the time, I was pretty new to doing this stuff, and that the Hub folks didn't have any problem with me writing this story. So again, this is obviously right as the pandemic was setting in, just a few months afterwards. So this was from 2020. I forgot. Let's see what the column says. Rowdy 70s Stoughton were nothing like today's events. For the first time ever, our beloved Norwegian festival has been replaced by a large empty void. To provide some solace, the Hub has encouraged residents to indulge in nostalgia and reflect back on the traditions that have made the 17th of May such a unique time. My personal memories invariably go back to the 70s, when our Stoughton celebration was more like an episode of the HBO series Deadwood than the family-friendly festival it has become today. Back then, our Stoughton headquarters was Rorgie's, the greatest tavern in the world. Now it's the Hallmark store on Main Street, but now it's actually the Overt Gallery, and I challenge you to go in there and look at the art and stuff and not think about Rorgies. During the day, Rorgies catered largely to non-working farmers who played euchre nonstop at a table in the window for all the world to see. You guys remember that? The tables were designed so you could put your drinks down below. They had these little holders, so the whole table was just fine for the euchre. But in the evenings, Rorgie would serve a younger clientele. My friends and I would meet there on a regular basis to sample the limited 25-cent drink menu, which consisted of red ones, Budweiser, or blue ones, PBR. Does anybody remember the bartender's name? I've completely blanked on that. So if you remember it, he was a real fixture. And anyhow, all you do is scream out red one or blue one. After a few libations, we would invariably launch into our own off-kilter versions of traditional Norwegian folk tunes, like "We are just some carp from Stoughton." "We are just some carp from Stoughton, come up here for a real good time. Yumpin' Yemeni, I feel yali, ya for sure us carp ain't tame." That's a great Stoughton line. "Yeah, for sure, us carp ain't tame." I think we should continue to talk like that, especially the people from out of town. And we also would sing the Cleu Da Do, which is the Cleu Ducka Do song. Here's a sample line from that. Well, I'll sing the whole song, what the heck. "Cleu Da Do, Ducka Do, Esterhaugen, Cleu Ducka Do, Esterhaugen. Cleu Da Do, said old Esterhaugen. Cleu Da Do, said old Esterhaugen. Cleu Da Do, Ducka Do, Esterhaugen. Cleu Ducka, Yaki Yaka Stoughton after dark." What? That's the beauty of beer at Rorgie. Actually, if I can do an aside, I was listening to Prairie Home Companion years ago, and they played a song on the show, and it sounded like Cleu Da Do, and it was called "Somebody and His Chickens." And it was a traditional Norwegian folk song, and the Cleu Ducka stuff was originally them going, imitating chickens. And somehow it morphed into a Stoughton version of it, and featured, of course, Esther Hogue. Yeah. That's the Stoughton way. We would also form non-existent subversive groups like the Anti-Lutefisk League, who plotted to hijack a truck full of lutefisks and destroy the dastardly contents, until we realized that lutefisk cannot be destroyed under any circumstance. By then we were college kids, and it was kind of the 60s, 70s, trying to be a little rowdy was something that came up all the time. The famous pecuniary Gilmore Rorgie actually began hiring bands for Sutnamai Fridays, and the crowds of locals and visitors alike spilled out into the street late into the night. On Saturday, the festivities would extend to Beester's Park, now Pleasant Hill Park, named after the four boys with outsized personalities who comprised the Beester family, who lived nearby. Beester's Park was home to an all-day impromptu softball game, lorded over by the alternative king of Sutnamai, Tom Jacobson, a.k.a. Jaco. Jaco wore a Norwegian flag as a cape and a headpiece that could generously be categorized as a crown. Jaco filmed all the proceedings non-stop with an 8mm camera. A big feature of the event was a seemingly unlimited flow of kegged beer. Strange as it may seem today, the Stoughton police had a verbal agreement with the revelers that allowed them to serve the beer as long as they kept the proceedings under control and solely at the park. Supposedly, the IRS even showed up one year in an attempt to collect sales taxes for the large amount of libations served. I don't have a source for that. I have a DVR with over 2 hours of Jaco's crude footage on it. Some of us here that I see in the room are in that footage. And suffice it to say, the film will never appear in a Lipsrisa video archive. It was kind of amazing. I talked to one of the Beester boys, and I think at the height, they actually drank 22 kegs of beer in one Saturday at Beester's Park. I've heard the number 16 as well. And I think Tom Chost ran the liquor store, so maybe he can, justify some of those figures. And again, the other problem was, of course, we didn't wind up keeping the beer there. On Sundays, the remaining kegs always made an appearance on the east side of town near the current Quick Trip, much to the chagrin of the police. Back then, the parade followed a much longer route, originating near Kegonsa School. Jaco footage reveals young women clad in bunads, happily tapping free beer for a line of parade fans as a cavalcade of school bands and floats streamed by in the background. The Stoughton Norwegian dancers visited Norway for the first time in 1972, and to return the favor, Oslo sent the official dance group of the King to Stoughton for the celebration in 1973. Our family housed one of the dancers, a young boy whose father owned some boats called the Norwegian Cruise Line. We're not in touch with them, unfortunately. The visiting performers were a talented and gregarious bunch with great stamina. In addition to performing numerous times with the Stoughton dancers, they also managed to sustain a hectic social schedule, which kept them all at gatherings until nearly sunrise every single night or day. I befriended a dancer named Mikael Engvall, who invited us to visit any time. A month later, I found myself, along with 2 Stoughton companions, celebrating the Midsummer's Night Eve on the Norwegian Big Døy Peninsula with the entire Oslo dance group. I remain friends with Mikael to this day. We write back and forth about once a month. And it's weird, I'm in my 70s, and even though he was a young Norwegian dancer, he's like in his 70s too. I guess it works that way overseas. But anyhow, that trip was fun because it was the college kind of backtrapping trip you took, but the dancers picked us up at the train station and dragged us around. It was sunny, like 20 hours a day, and so we just had to party nonstop, and they dragged us around for 2 weeks, and no other tourists knew we were Americans because we got to be completely part of that dance group. So it was a real unique experience. Also, we went up a fjord and actually stayed in the house where Esther Howe was born. Yes?
Did they speak English?
Oh yeah, Norwegians, well, they speak the King's English. So they speak English that's, in Norway you learn the King's English. They're a little more proper. Their English is a little better than, say, ours. You know? But again, that was an awful long time ago in those parties. There was drinking involved, but I never saw any slip-ups in the dancing or anything like that. I was also present when the shots were fired. Oh, Pete.
I just wanted to interject. I think it's Matt from Rorgy's.
Matt, that's right, absolutely. Ding, 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 ding. If there's a cookie, I watch. Yeah, it was Matt, because everybody go, Matt, red one, Matt, blue one, and he just, and he literally, I don't know where he slept, but he seemed to be there all the time. Okay, I was also present when the shots were fired. It was 1975, and I was performing on stage in a band called Clint Jordan and the Crevulettes. They were formed by cast members of A Thurber Carnival, the first ever production of the Stoughton Village Players. Clint Jordan was a character in the play, so I guess that's where the name came from. But even Bev Hansen was in our little group. We learned 3 songs just, for the cast party. We were in a beer tent in the parking lot of the North Chalet. Here it says, now home to the infamous Shakers, but now it's more of a church, and I think there's no bar down there, but there are rooms or apartments, and it's one of Reverend Jim's big contributions to our beautiful community. Anyhow, and the crowd was a tad rowdy. By this time, our little celebration was attracting an unseemly out-of-town element. In this case, the CC Riders, Madison's infamous biker clubs. Remember them? Even though, boy, we are afraid of the CC Riders, but every year, biker clubs from Chicago would drive to Wisconsin solely to beat up the CC Riders. Anyhow, there was some sort of altercation, and a few gunshots were fired through the ceiling of the tent. I remember the gunshots. The Bacchanal that was the 70s, Stoughton and I never recovered, even though that was like 74, and it did limp on into the 70s as well. So it took a while. I think, obviously, the real death knell was the Larry Sylvester incident. Anyhow, let me finish the story and then we can chat. Reigning in the excesses of the festivity of that era was certainly the responsible and necessary thing to do. Today's celebration is safe and satisfying for the entire family, and it's something the entire community can take pride in. But for Norwegian Americans and other locals of a certain age, the fuzzy memories of Stoughton back in the day will always hold a special place in their hearts and perhaps other organs as well. So, you guys remember that stuff? It's, Larry Sylvester, that was, I don't even know how to get into that, but it had to do with a raffle for a Camaro, a whole car. Because I moved to Colorado right after graduating from college, I'm sorry to say it. So I was, in 76, I was gone, this is hearsay, but didn't they sold raffle tickets, and he filled the raffle pool or whatever, printed like 1,000 tickets and wound up winning the Camaro. And I remember it was really outrageous here. And to me, as far as I can tell, that's when it really ran out of energy. But we know the 70s was bad because it took over 3 years. How many decades would it be? When did we first have a beer tent? It took so many years to even introduce the idea of a beer after the debauched 70s. And I don't know, maybe I'm cynical or whatever, and I never had children, but I thought it was a lot of fun. Anyhow, it's one of those things, I was really pleased that the Hub didn't have any problem with that. And then there was another thing I wasn't here for. Didn't a Shriner run over a kid during the parade? Yes. That's some good PR on the local news. But the Shriner was on a motorcycle, because they never had little Shriner cars, did they? In fact, we should think about doing that. I don't know about you, but the last few years, the parade's been a little lame, We should probably interject some stuff. Maybe the Senior Center can sponsor a fleet of 25 little cars, and we can design our own hats or something. Oh, man. Anyhow. Anybody else want to mention anything about Stoughton Area? If you're okay, I'll keep reading. Okay, well, let's move to Carl Sampson. What do you say? You got a park right here named after him. This one, let's see, this was written in December of 2021. So by then we were kind of coming out of the pandemic. I don't know about you, but all my memories, when you get older, your memories get skewed to begin with, but this damn pandemic has thrown everything. It was fun researching these just to write down some numbers and recall it, because it's just been fuzzy for me completely, Anyhow, everybody I know knows of Carl Sampson. Here's a funny thing. Doing this stuff for the Hub, it's hard to figure out who your audience is, I tend to think it's you guys, my peers, and those of us that have been here a long time, and that's the area I specify in. Obviously, since my memories of the 80s and 90s, I wasn't really here, so I have crystalline memories of, a long, long time ago, and then obviously there's a bunch kind of missing. But I think that works well, because, at least for us. But I don't know about you, but there's a lot of new people moving to town. I don't know if you ever chat with them. My sense is a lot of the new people really want to know Stoughton history and, really want to be involved in kind of the whole Scandinavian thing. I sell these yard signs every year, and we have a Stoughton Area open house, and we tend to meet every new person that moves to town because somebody told them that they have to have one of my signs to live in Stoughton. I hope they didn't say it was the law, but I think they don't want them. They just feel they better buy one. But I asked them, how everybody is with them and stuff, and they love it, and they really want to learn and do more, especially during the pandemic. They were eager. And the great thing is that they're new. So all the feuds we've had with each other since the 50s or whatever, they don't care about those. They don't even know about them. They're just eager to get involved. And that's kind of neat. And that's the way I feel like things like Carl Sampson and just anything about Stoughton. Actually, I have a story after this one that addresses that, if you guys can make it. Okay. Carl Sampson Recollections. Their title was Remembering Local Icon Carl Sampson. Back in September, the Common Council voted to name Stoughton's newest park, a small stretch of land between the Senior Center and the Yahara River, the Carl Sampson Park, after Stoughton's iconic elder statesman and unofficial historian. Carl Richard Sampson, who passed away in 2017 at the age of 90, was best known for reciting the Gettysburg Address from memory at Memorial Day celebrations in Stoughton for 72 straight years. Whoa, that was his thing. But to many, he was celebrated as the man who unrelentingly walked the streets of Stoughton in his three-piece suit, logging more miles on foot than any resident in this community's history. I wonder if he had a cell phone, I wonder how many steps he put in a day for those of us that are lucky to hit 5,000. Anyhow, I thought I'd delve a little deeper into the life of this singular man by talking to Dean Hansen. Many of you might know Dean and know that Dean will tell you stories, who by his own account knew more about Carl than almost anyone in town. Dean's relationship with Carl went back to before he was born. Carl was friends with Dean's grandparents. His uncles and aunts attended school with him, and later Carl was a guest at the home of Dean's wife's family for all holidays, where he was referred to as Uncle Carl. Dean and I met at Culver's in late November to talk about the enigma that was Carl Sampson. Carl lived his entire life in a little house on Hillside Avenue. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with where it was, which he inherited from his parents when they died. To say the house was unusual would be a serious understatement. Carl had a refrigerator, but it was never plugged in because Carl never ate at home and had no food in the house. Instead, the refrigerator served as a bookshelf filled to the brim with volumes. Instead, he had a television, but he never repaired the ancient picture tube when it blew because, well, he never watched television. He also didn't have a telephone until after his first heart attack in the early 80s. Carl arose in the night after experiencing symptoms, got fully dressed, and walked up Ridge Street to the hospital where he received treatment. Before his release, the doctor gave him the ironic advice to do more walking. That's pretty great. Yeah, you gotta rely on those doctors. The doctor also insisted that he install a telephone so he could contact an ambulance in case of a future event. Carl begrudgingly complied, but paid the extra money to have an unlisted number. The only people to have Carl's number were Dean's wife and mother-in-law, Dean himself, his priest, and lastly, the doctor. Carl's power of recollection were legendary powers. He was likely a savant, an individual on the autism spectrum who has a rare but extraordinary brilliance in a specialized field. Carl knew the names and birth dates of nearly everyone in town, which he would always mention whenever you met him. His knowledge of Stoughton history was unsurpassed. Back in Time, a video produced by WSTO-TV, hi Spencer, hi guys, and available on YouTube, features Carl expounding on the history of Stoughton buildings in great detail. He could recite all the Wisconsin counties and their seats in order. His knowledge was also extended to the more sundry aspects of Stoughton culture, and it too was encyclopedic, so it wasn't always above board. I remember the first time my wife and I met Carl when we moved back here, we were at the Coffee Cup, and he was a little confused because there is another Bill Amundson in town who isn't related to me but was my dad's best friend since the 40s. And Carl, when I introduced myself, he kind of got this look in his eyes like, oh, that explains it. There was another Bill Amundson. Also, Carl and my wife shared the same birthday.
Yeah.
We weren't really friends, we just got to speak with him a couple times. Okay, on to the story. For over 25 years, Carl worked at the venerable Mosley's bookstore on the square in Madison, where his photographic memory was put to good use. Since he didn't drive, Carl took the train to his job every day. I've written a story about train trips to Madison. In the morning, he purchased the State Journal and read it cover to cover during his commute, and on his return, he did the same with the Capital Times, an afternoon paper, if you recall, which was then an afternoon paper. Oh, I wrote that. He also worked at the Badger Theater, as well as Felons Menswear and the First St. Vinny's over on Jefferson Street. Some of us remember it as the old Super Value. I heard since one thing, apparently Carl didn't like Frank Lloyd Wright, because when he worked at Mosley's, Wright had a habit of coming into the store and just wildly going through books, and he just left them everywhere. And Carl always had to clean up after, the genius's visit to the store. But to many, Carl was famous simply for walking. In the early days of Facebook, there was a page called The Man Who Walked that was devoted to Carl's pedestrian travels, especially his frequent trips to visit late relatives in the Catholic cemetery. Although he was never seen in anything but his three-piece suit and overcoat, Dean revealed that Carl did occasionally wear blue jeans underneath his suit for insulation in the winter. Anybody know that? Since he didn't eat at home, yeah, there's a Carl secret. Since he didn't eat at home, Carl was a natural fixture at all Stoughton's restaurants. But he was also something of a night owl and frequented most of the town's taverns. He started every Friday and Saturday at Berg's, which of course now is the whatever bar, and we all go there 2 or 3 times a week, at precisely 9 p.m., and he would work his way through town, sometimes making it as far as the Club Barber on the Lake. Since Carl knew virtually everyone in town, rides were not difficult for him to find. I once spotted him at the Utica bar less than an hour after I saw him on foot on the west side of Stoughton. I swear, even though every once in a while you thought of Carl as a ghostly thing, because it's like I saw him there 10 minutes ago and now he's at a bar 10 miles away. Maybe there was more than one Carl, you know? There's a lot of mystery. He usually drank schooners since they were a better deal. Carl sent thank you cards to everyone for every act of kindness shown him. Dean showed me a selection. Each was lovingly handcrafted and covered with stamps that went back decades. Some of the stamps had value as low as a penny. Every December 24th, Carl made sure that his Christmas cards were postmarked and sent out during the last delivery of the day, so each and every recipient would get their card precisely on Christmas Eve. Quite the Carl thing to do. Anyhow, after writing this, I started hearing all kinds of Carl stories. Anybody have anything they'd like to share? I'll start off. I had some friends that said they lived next door to Carl, and that he mowed his yard in cowboy boots and a wife beater t-shirt. Does that sound? I mean, I've never seen him anywhere except his outfit, so a lot of this might be hearsay innuendo. But I think I could write a second one, but come on, Carl stories. Anybody? Did you know kids that were afraid of Carl? Yes, sir.
Mowing the lawn with a t-shirt was true.
It was true.
We
Excellent.
lived less than a block away, and
Excellent.
I have seen that. So.
Did anybody here ever go into his house? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know either. I think Dean seemed to know an awful lot about him. Also, I know he was very Catholic in our very Lutheran town. And I know Dean was saying he was disappointed with his service because they didn't play the songs and some of the stuff he really would have liked, you know. But he got a park here. Do people talk about him much at the center? Does he come up these days?
I don't hear people saying much about him, but we refer to the park all the time.
You know, with our local arts council, we, you know, there was talk about doing a Carl kind of memorial piece of art. Yeah. And this is not good to say, but if they did a statue of Carl, I pointed out he could be misconstrued for Slender Man. And so it would be, you know, think about that before you do a Carl statue. I think if we do a memorial for Carl, I think it should be different. I think it should be just a block of wood or a block of granite, and you come up there and say your name, and the block of granite tells you your birthday. You know, and you could always press a Gettysburg Address. But anyhow.
I worked at a dental office, and even if he didn't have an appointment, he'd come in on June 1st and wish her a happy birthday.
Really?
Oh, yeah. And he and my cousin both had birthdays on that day.
Wow, wow. Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't, you know, get to know him better.
I waited on tables at the Halversons, and he came in one night late, like almost 9 o'clock, and had a steak, and he was with a very pretty woman, and, you know, I didn't ask any questions, but he left, I think his bill was like $25, and he gave me a $20 bill
Wow.
tip. Did
he pay his bill? Because I know people in general just almost paid for him wherever he went.
He paid.
He did,
so-
yeah.
And he gave me $20.
A nice tip.
Oh, that's so cool. Anybody else? Mm-hmm.
When I was in high school, a bunch of us would take the train from Stoughton to Madison, and we had enough time to either go to Manchester's and Carmen's and some of those nice old stores around the square, or we'd see a movie on State Street. Just enough time to get back to the train station to take the last train, 5:30, whatever it was.
5:20, I believe.
5:20, back to Stoughton, and it didn't cost much. We were teenagers, maybe a quarter, maybe a little more. But I remember seeing Carl all the time at the train station.
And I remember seeing him at Mosley's. I don't think I made the connection. He was just that mysterious, rather scary guy,
Yeah.
you know? I mean, he was the perfect bookstore employee. And then I think somebody said, you know, after the train stopped that he would take the Greyhound bus
Yeah, he did.
for a while.
He did.
I did a separate thing on the train. We always are trying to decide on what it cost us. I think a quarter or whatever, but it didn't leave till noon, I don't think. And then, yeah, we had a routine. Maybe if I get to do this again, I'll read that story. But I remember, yeah, it was 5:20, and a bunch of me and my friends, 5 of us, missed the train, and we were in tears. We had to call Stoughton and have our mom pick us up, you know? Oh, God, that was terrible. Okay, I guess this one is called, well, Jim Ferroli called this a think piece. I guess where I have some opinions, and I don't know what that exactly means. I guess it's more of an editorial or something like that. And this too was written during the pandemic. And it's funny, there's some things in this piece obviously that are a little naive and out of date. It's called "To Thrive, Stoughton Should Embrace Its Eccentric Past." Okay, so it's okay if I just keep reading some of these? Stoughton has always had an outsized reputation for a community of such modest size. This reputation is based on equal parts notoriety and eccentricity. To be blunt, Stoughton has always exhibited a weirdness that has drawn attention to itself. As Ferd Hummey, author of Oak Opening, the seminal history of Stoughton first published in 1947, noted, Stoughton's wild revelry gave this community a far-flung notoriety. That's a tough sentence to read. He mentioned the propensity of Stoughton's hard-working, hard-drinking, boisterous, swashbuckling elements to work hard, play hard, and fight hard. Ferd was talking about Stoughton during the boomtown days of the early 1900s, but Stoughton residents' penchant for brawling extended well into the 70s and beyond. I recall out-of-town toughs darkening the doors of local watering holes, looking for an Auberg or a Nelson to confront in a pugilistic manner on numerous occasions. By the way, I'm sorry I once in a while use big words. I actually know some people that really don't like it if I use a word like pugilistic when I could just be a boxer, but I'm sorry, it's just fun to use big words once in a while. The resulting brawl often sent the denizens of the tavern scurrying for cover as fists and occasionally bar furniture flew with profusions. I also recall that the Stoughton boys, and occasionally girl, almost always emerged victorious. We can talk a little about this at the end of the story. Stoughton also had more than its fair share of characters. Famous innovators such as Per Listney and Enoch Reindahl exerted nationwide influence plying their unique crafts. But other local luminaries such as Earl and Pearl, Crazy Mary, Saul's Wigsbone, Jamie Thorpe, Muscovy Duck, and more created their own form of legend. As kids, we often had personal contact with these beloved storytellers, personal contact with these beloved locals, but as often as not, we learned about them through storytellers, more commonly referred to by the acronym that included the letters B and S. These BSers were keepers of the narrative tradition, and they often embellished local lore to heights far beyond objective recognition. But these wayward wags weren't held in contempt for their loose relationship to the truth. Quite the contrary. They were important, indispensable contributors to the community. They kept the story of Stoughton going. I can't recall the amount of times my father began a tale with, I heard this one from so-and-so. Of course, he was always a bullshitter, but. I should get a page turner, shouldn't I? I had relatives, including my late uncle, Doug Fundheller, also the mayor, who wholeheartedly partook of this tradition. In fact, Doug used to say, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. And I'm sure a lot of us have probably used that line. With the onset of the counterculture, Stoughton's weirdness embodied a narrative of a different sort. Jokes. Madison author and radio personality Michael Feldman recalled a joke that circulated in the capital city in the late 60s. It went, what do you get when you combine a serving of lutefisk with a hit of acid? The answer, a trip to Stoughton. I remember visiting Stoughton in the 80s during my long hiatus in the West, and by then the humor had descended into something close to ridicule. Numerous Madison radio shock jocks would cap off sophomoric observations with an exclamation, at least you're not in Stoughton. Or, that's something that could only happen in Stoughton. And then the whole morning zoo would erupt in knowing bellows, accompanied by canned sound effects. We were akin to a laughingstock. And then something curious happened. The smug citizens of Madison began speaking about Stoughton in positive terms. The phrase, worth a visit, began showing up, trending. The turning point now seems obvious. It was the Opera House. Suddenly we were a hotbed of culture that transcended our quaint Norwegian celebrations. Soon folks on such counterculture mainstays as radio We're singing the praises of Stoughton's uncut gem. Madison's Isthmus called it a jewel of a venue in a 2012 piece. Folks began traveling from destinations as far away as Chicago, Minneapolis, and yes, Rockford. We were given credibility. Soon other things began making Stoughton seem more viable to outsiders. Lithuania gave our heritage a shiny contemporary museum sheen. Farm-to-table cuisine, farmers markets, and a brew pub are now a real thing. We're still not cosmopolitan enough to have our own Starbucks. Ha ha, we got one. We nailed it. But folks from back east, coasties, can revel in the colorful new Dunkin' Donuts. The Able Gallery, that Paoli-based art mainstay, decamped for refurbished gigs in Stoughton in 2019. And a hip newfangled variation on river recreation, the Whitewater Park, is well on its way to becoming a reality. Okay, so maybe that didn't age so well. So the question becomes, can Stoughton maintain its idiosyncratic, eccentric past as we embrace the cultural realities of 2020 and beyond? Can we, to paraphrase the catchphrase of other larger communities, keep Stoughton weird? We've been handed such a vast treasure of raw material that it would be downright criminal not to utilize our historic uniqueness, even the questionable parts, for future endeavors. As we wade into the future, Stoughton needs to recognize that we don't have to discard our lovably strange past to be viable and inviting. We should build on it. We're unique. We're distinct. We're Stoughton. And that's something that only can happen in Stoughton. So anyhow, I guess that's how a think piece goes. See, I kind of had an opinion and I jumped from one thing to another. Yes, Pete?
Well, I just was thinking about Rorgy's again, and there was a guy who used to hang out at Rorgy's, and he had his gun with him all the time. And he would come out, you know, at the pool hall, we were hanging out. He would come out of Rorgy's and start shooting the pigeons on the tops of the roofs.
I think I've heard that story from other folks.
I can't remember his name, but he was like a venerable guy.
Yeah, no, I've heard that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much stuff I don't know. Like back then, you could kind of, of a certain age, that was that area. You had Rorgy's, then you had Holton's, and in middle school, you know, the soda fountain, that's where we went. Then you had the Viking pool hall.
Yeah.
And I think I went in there once on a dare, but that was full of hoods. And it was real smoky and stuff. But depending on your age, those places had, you know, a significant feel. And then I guess the JNS across the street.
Yeah.
I want to maybe do a series on just the lost taverns of Stoughton, you know. Or maybe,
You know, my mom used to go to the JNS. That was the hangout for the kids in high school. And then we did, you know.
Yeah, and of course now it's Tailgaters, which, you know, does have a great hamburger.
Crazy. You know?
The kids that were, oh, how can I say that? Nice kids went to the JNS, and the rough kids went to the Dairy Bar. And when you walked by the Dairy Bar, which was right next to the Badger Theater, you looked the other way, because they were scary.
Oh, wow, wow. Yeah, you know, the thing about the Nelsons and the Aubergs, Gary Auberg was in my class, and he kind of said, I see you mentioned my family. It's like, oh, that's right, the public does get to see these things. And he was always known as, because we are next to each other in lockers all our lives, and he was a good Auberg in that he didn't beat us up. But an awful lot of my group has stories about getting beat up by Aubergs. And it's weird now, of course. I mean, a lot of the tough kids have passed, or the rest have had kids and are kind of normal members of the community now. I remember getting beat up by Larry Auberg. It was at a party, and he kicked me in the head repeatedly, but he didn't know who I was, so it was okay. But this is what I did, because back in the day, you know, I remember being in taverns where a group of out-of-towners would show up saying, we're looking for the Aubergs, and if somebody was there at the bar, you know, they'd get out. I mean, it was really Wild West stuff. Another time, I was at the old bowling alley right here at the bar, and my mom and dad were at the bar sitting with some friends. We were sitting with some friends, and a fight erupted, and furniture was flying around, and I looked across the room. I was under a table, and I made eye contact with my parents under another table. That's the beauty of Stoughton.
What a nice story.
But anyhow, the reason Larry Auberg beat me up is because I I did a horrible thing. I brought an out-of-towner to a Stoughton party. And the out-of-towner was Feline Chose's brother. But of course they beat him up because he was from Oregon. But then they beat me up. So the next morning I'm sitting at the table having breakfast, and I didn't notice there was blood running down my face. And my mom said, "What happened to you?" My parents were very compassionate. And I said, "Oh, Larry Albert, kicked me in the head a bunch last night." And she said, "Yeah, they used to do that when I was in high school too." Get the Mercurochrome. Anyhow, yeah, and again, I don't want to go into the thing about the water park, but craft beer swilling kayakers are going to take away our hog barn. I don't know which side you're on with that, but that's another thing. Just like a lot of these stories, there's just so many. I didn't think when I started writing these things I'd be able to do them, but it just, I think I can do this for a long time, you know. I also love the kind of smug Madison kind of thing, you know, that I know when I had a little studio on Main Street, when Madison people would come, Anita and I would kind of dumb it down. "Oh, shucks, thanks for coming from Madison, you know. That's so kind of you guys for here in the big city." Anyhow, I think right now Stoughton has the upper hand. Madison has enough problems that this is time for us to make our move. Okay, how you guys doing? Should I read one more? I also want to play my Stoughton song, so I'm talking about 10 minutes. You got the patience?
Yeah.
All right, well, I thought I'd read a new one about the community building, just because in this case, you know, well, I get to write about it. One night I realized the community building's coming down. I gotta write something about it because it meant so much. And then it turned out that they had this event, and it just, you know, the historic people, well, the sound wasn't very good anyhow, but they didn't really talk about the building. I mean, there was school board members talking about a referendum, and then they had some girl that was getting good grades talking about how the Stoughton schools are so good in the future, and it's like, what does that have to do with the community building? And then they kind of said, "Okay, those of you, get together and have your memories," you know, and a lot of the doors, it just felt like a real cheap shot to older folks. And they said they were looking for some speakers, and I suggested I could do 3 minutes, which would probably be 20, but or something about it, but they said, "Oh, we have all the speakers we need." So anyhow, it was kind of bugging me. But it was one of those things, it didn't come down right away, and I had time to write this, so I got to just start asking around. And in this one, when I submitted, Scott De La Rue, which never happened before, he said, "Oh, people are gonna love this." So anyhow, I don't think my style has particularly changed, but this one's called "The Community Building is History." Again, the title came up real easily. They're finally doing it. They're tearing down the community building. The old armory will soon be nothing more than 31 tons of steel and an immeasurable amount of concrete rubble, as well as a couple hundred truckloads of memory. Damn progress. The Stoughton School District gave the public one last look at the facility on March 7th in a ceremony that was long on talk about transition and opportunity for the future, but distressingly short on the history of the building itself. Designed by the Madison architectural firm of Law and Potter, the new Stoughton Armory was intended to be an all-purpose institution, combining a National Guard armory with a gymnasium and community building. It was funded by the New Deal Works Project Administration, the WPA, and was our contribution to the Art Deco style of the era, whose highlights included Rockefeller Center in New York and Hoover Dam in the West. It featured many exquisite Art Deco touches, including terrazzo inlays, sleekly curved guardrails, and period signage. The building was dedicated on Friday, May 1st, 1942, just 5 months after Pearl Harbor, to a great deal of fanfare. Over 2,000 people were present, including four past Stoughton School superintendents. The press was extensive. In fact, the library has a lot of articles. It was a deal. Everyone has their own recollections of the community building or armory, sometimes just called the new gym, and later on, confusingly, the old gym. Dave Asperheim started high school in 1946. He came from a dairy farm with no indoor plumbing. He took his first showers ever at the community building. My first experience took place on Saturday mornings. Elementary school kids would gather for coaching on the finer points of basketball, and we formed teams that would play about 5 minutes during halftime of the big kids' varsity games. In 5th grade, I actually scored a basket during one of those matches. Little did I know at the time that it would be the high point of my Stoughton athletic career. The old gym was the place to be in the early 60s to witness athletic prowess, the athletic prowess of Stoughton's All-American Dan Moser, under the tutelage of Coach Larry Bucky Marshall. The kids always sat in the north bleachers, and my parents warned us to ignore the antics of, here he is again, my Uncle Doug Fundeller, who sat behind the visitors' bench with 3 friends and hurled endless profanities at the referees. It was gross. But it wasn't just prep basketball. The Harlem Globetrotters, led by comic hook shot master Metal-like Lemon, beat the hapless Washington Generals at the Armory. You know, it turns out that's the one fact that out-of-towners and stuff were just amazed by, that the Harlem Globetrotters played here. Where do you think they played more than once? Because I sure talked to a lot of people that saw them. And you see the Globetrotters there?
I think I
So yeah, I don't know the date, or anything like that. But anyhow, donkey basketball. Donkey basketball fundraisers were a regular event, with a touring company providing the burros for hapless teachers and local luminaries to embarrass themselves on while trying to stay upright and score baskets. Hilarity always ensued. Skip Payton recalls seeing the legendary WWA wrestler and peck juggler Seaman Art Thompson at the gym, who's from Madison. He's another guy to Google, peck juggling. He's one of those guys that could make his pecs do all kinds of crazy things. He's very historic, apparently. And future Olympian Russ Hellickson achieved his early victories on the building's featured center mat. For years, a dungeon-like basement room served as Coach Vern Pieper's underground lair. Originally a shooting range for the local National Guard, it later became a soundproof practice range for youngsters eager to fire .22 caliber rifles under the guise of gun safety. I remember the wrestling room as a sweaty, foul-smelling hellhole with dripping asbestos-covered pipes. But it was a highly effective incubator for legions of Stoughton grappling champions. Yeah, and that's been locked. I can't get down there. I think they kept it locked for the past 30 years because if they opened it, a giant toxic cloud would form over Stoughton and we'd never see the sun again. Also, it kind of turned me off to wrestling, and in my particular case, I'm quite thankful for that. The Stoughton Norwegian Dancers have been synonymous with the community building since their inception over 70 years ago. I estimate that I've seen at least 50 dance performances there in my day. Virtually everyone in my family and extended family, except for me, and later on my second cousin Michael, was a dancer at one time or another. So attendance at the shows was often mandatory rather than by choice. Also, it's one reason I had to leave the state, is that I wasn't a Norwegian dancer and my family couldn't tolerate the shame without me being exiled for 35 years. There were other dances and dancers, the most famous being the Fireman's Ball. I was too young to attend, but reportedly they were elegant, sumptuous events attended to by local elite, often involving masquerade. Stoughton's Sammy Agam Orchestra, the house band of WKOW's Dairyland Jubilee with Big John Schermerhorn, provided the music. Tom Chose told me the ball featured a secretive bar underneath the bleachers that supposedly nobody knew about. Anyhow, we can talk a little about that in a minute. Our senior class in 1971 booked the Siegel Schwall Band to play at the community building at the height of their popularity. Orchestrated by class president John Eichster, the show was an audacious success. I met Corky Siegel years later, and he still marveled at how a group of high schoolers pulled the show off. Author's note, Corky Siegel's Chamber Blues will close out the spring season at the Stoughton Opera House on May 11th. That's kind of fun when you got something that actually works in real time. It's like, please publish that before. Apparently it was a great show. He's 80 years old now, and it was terrific. So he's maintained a connection with Stoughton. Finally, I served as a substitute teacher in the pre-pandemic times, and occasionally I had the good fortune to be given 25 kids, a whistle, and the keys to the building with the instructions to go shoot some baskets. Exactly as I'd done in that very gym nearly 60 years before. Needless to say, I felt like the proverbial pig in feces. I really do. I remember that. Like, this is the coolest thing in the world. You know, I'm wearing a whistle, and I got the keys to the community building. I know in my heart that at a certain point a structure outlives its usefulness and needs to make room for something more timely, more youthful. Still, it can be a tough pill to swallow. For those of us of a certain age, there's the obvious metaphor, the comparison of a building to our own mortality. A structure, like a human, isn't just flesh and bones. Not that structures are flesh and bones, they're also building materials. A little mistake I realized later on after writing this. But a living repository of our memories of our time on Earth. So it's hard not to take the old Jim's demise personally. Hopefully something magnificent, or at least worthy, will rise in its place. We drove by there just before we came down here, and I don't see anything worthy rising, so I guess we shouldn't get our hopes up. Okay, anyhow, the Fireman's Ball. I just saw posters. Did any of you, was that a real big event in town?
Oh, it was so huge.
And did it involve
Everybody
kids
came.
as well?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's kind of a vague thing, but it was did people go out of their way to dress up?
Oh, yeah. Yes, oh, they really came up, especially the Cottage Grove group and maybe the Oregon group or Evansville group, community groups like the Rotary or the Lions.
Oh, okay.
They would come up with these great big masks and they'd come out, you know, either dancing or just kind of marching onto the.
Wow.
And they would get judged and the best costumes would, I don't know if they got money, but they got something
Yeah.
as the best costume.
Yeah.
Had our picture, my cousins and I, was four of us, and we were 10 and 12.
Uh-huh.
And then appeared in the Capital Times, I still have that picture.
You know, speaking of which, remember when like the Capital Times, they had a Stoughton News? The local papers all had a Stoughton News every single day. That, you know, that's the kind of thing you don't miss until it's gone, and you realize how cool. And there was, who was the correspondent?
Norris Linderud.
Norris Linderud,
Norris,
okay. Yeah, there's just so much stuff I don't know yet, you know? And like, cause Stoughton did have like sophisticated folks that wanted to be the important party people and stuff. There's so many things I want to explore. I want to explore the Lutheran Catholic divide that goes, but again, some of these involve like real research, you know? But like that last story, I got to mention like 5 different people, which is, so the way I love to do it is where something like that, where you have memories, but you throw in a little history and stuff. So anybody got any good ideas from?
I remember regarding the Fireman's Ball, that some of the firemen, you know, they'd wear their uniform, they look so handsome with their hats, and by the end of the night, their hats would be tilted, and you
They
could
were under the
smell
bleachers.
beer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some of the firemen were kind of few sheets to the wind by the time the ball ended. They'd stay in the back, and you just knew they were drinking beer, but they were pretty quiet.
And
about
where
it.
did it come from? Yeah, you know, a lot of my, I just lost my stream of conscious. Imagine at this age, forgetting what you were going to say. But a lot of the memories there was a lot about kids remembering Gene Reek, which was a separate thing. And again, Bill Cahey, I decided we won't touch that episode of Stoughton history for the time being. And a lot of personal things from band instructors and things like that. That is one problem. I don't know if they exactly said, but I think these hub stories are supposed to be 800, 850 words. And I never thought about that, but when you write, you know, suddenly it is a thing. And when I'm starting, I'm already, you know, counting, now on a computer, it tells you, counting the words down. This one, I think, was 950, and I was able to sneak it in, but once in a while, it's really, well, maybe it's good, since I tend to go on, that I am limited by words, because then I have to kind of restrain myself, so. Gosh, anybody else have anything I should be writing stories about? I think the next one I'm just gonna do I like doing personal ones. I did one on hitchhiking, and I try not to do just Stoughton, so I don't become known as the Stoughton history guy, because I know there is like apparently I'm going to be on some sort of advisory board for the hub. They haven't met, but I think there's like 40 people, and I'm supposed to be like the history guy, and it's like, I was gone 35 years, why am I the history guy? You know, but I mean, I don't remember my wife's name, she's a very nice woman, but I remember a bunch of, you know, jingles from cartoons in the 50s. So anyhow, okay, well.
Sorry, does anybody remember the man who used to always greet everyone with, "Hi, friend of mine"?
Yes.
Who was,
Johnson,
what was his name?
Oscar Johnson.
Oscar Johnson.
Pretty Oscar.
You know, I want to do one about all the eccentrics and stuff, and I'd like to do one, you know, when I was in art school, I did pictures of a lot of, like of Saul Wingsmoen and Jamie Thorpe and people like that, and it's weird, because, you know, we had the Happy Club, which was such a great thing. You know, all the developmentally disabled people in town were in a club. They did stuff. They cleaned sidewalks and things. They were just an integral part of the community. And I don't ever remember anybody being condescending, maybe good-naturedly teaching someone. But again, in this day and age, can I write a thing about the happy club and make it correct enough? I mean, things have changed so much, and it's really kind of sad. But that's one of the things I'd like to get to. So, I wrote a song about Stoughton, and I haven't played it in a long time, so I was wondering, since you haven't suffered enough, that maybe I could run it by you once?
Sure.
It's not quite noon.
Just one.
Yeah, well, except the parts I messed up and have to go back to. Well, that sounds close enough. I got a little lyric sheet because, well, at the Senior Center, I am at that point. God, I used to be able to remember things, and now, I mean, you know, there's just things that don't work. So anyhow, I got obviously Woody Guthrie wrote this song, and I stole it from him. So anyhow, this covers some of the stuff I wrote about. It's called This Town Is Your Town. This town is my town. This town is your town. From the west side quick trip to the east side quick trip to a PDQ. That was once a quick trip. I think it's going to be a vape shop. This town was made for you and me. There we go. There was a time when this town made wagons. Now we make trailers and a thing called Cummins. We've got Ortega and a new cheese factory. This town was made for you and me. This town is your town. This town is my town. From the House of Opera to the Super Walmart to the VFW and American Legion. Those old fashions really hit the spot. So I roamed and rambled, and I followed my footsteps to a real good fish fry, then another fish fry. I looked around me, it was a Friday. Fish fries were all that I could see. This town is your town. This town is my town. From the halls of Aldi to the new lifts for the South, Sugar High at Mustow's, Humphrey down at Coffee Cup. This town was made for you and me. We have a brew pub and some hipster cuisine, some farmers markets. There's a real downtown scene. There's no place like it, and I should know that, 'cause I've walked the streets of Fitchburg town. There's nothing there. This town is your town. This town is my town. From a home called Scotland to a house called Nazareth, growing old and venerable, forgetting Azura. No one gets out of this town alive. Oh. But every springtime there's a celebration. We act like we're our own Norwegian nation. Some folks eat left side, some folks wear bunad. Damnedest thing that you will ever see. This town is our town. It's the center of my town. Like a rape and pillage, but we raise our voices, make eye contact with our fellow man. Okay, this is the spoken portion, let's see. Make eye contact with our fellow man. You know, as Norwegians, we're not the most sociable. Making eye contact is our way of being bold and actually, communicating. Some people from out of town that come here might think that folks like us are a little stuck up, a little reserved. And yes, we might be reserved, but it's just our nature. Still, though, once in a while when people move here, we can be a little judgmental. Sometimes we take a little time to be accepting. Me, I never had that problem because, heck, I was gone 35 years, but my name's Amundson. So I came back here and I got to be part of the community right away. A lot of folks aren't that lucky. I am Norwegian, you're not Norwegian, and I don't think I consider you a local, 'cause 30 years here don't make you local. This town was made for only me. This town is my town. This town ain't your town. And we won't change it for a bunch of young clowns. Not for a minute, not for a lifetime. That's just the way this town will be. That's just the way this town will be. Let's talk it out over beers at BBG. This town was made for you. No, wait. Me. Thank you for tolerating my singing voice. Okay, that was a little bit of a cynical ending, but and by the way, the new people I meet seem to think everybody's very welcoming. So maybe a bit of that cliche of us being judgmental and stuff is starting to fade. Maybe I'll have to sit down and change it. Thanks, you've been great. It's lunchtime, and I don't know. I wouldn't mind doing this again. I got a lot more stories to read.